Many people act based on the image they've formed in their minds. When we hear the term dire wolf, most of us picture a massive, huge gray wolf, a creature larger, wilder, and more terrifying than the wolves living in the northern forests today. What we've described is actually an image derived from movies and video games. However, as scientists revealed a few years ago, much of this information was completely wrong. The dire wolf was not a fictional creature. It was entirely real. It roamed the lands where American cities stand today, but it wasn't the kind of animal you're picturing right now. The truth was even stranger than the legends. Until 20,000 years ago, herds of these animals roamed the northern regions and frozen lands of America. Across vast regions stretching from the coasts of California to the swamps of Florida, they preyed on horses, bison, and mammoths. They were considered among the most successful hunters on the continent. However, by the end of the Ice Age, they had vanished so completely that their species became extinct. This is the true story of the dire wolf. Why the stories told so far are wrong, what kind of animal it actually was, and where it lived. If you enjoy discovering the world's lost beneath the places we live, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's start with the animal itself. Let's start by building the real dire wolf, piece by piece, from the bones it left behind. Because on the surface, the legend is not entirely crazy. This was a big, powerful animal. A large dire wolf weighed somewhere between 130 and 150 pounds, with the heaviest individuals pushing past 170. Set that against a modern gray wolf, which usually weighs between 70 and 110 pounds, and you can see where the giant wolf idea comes from. The dire wolf was heavier, denser, and more solidly built than almost any wolf alive today. To put that weight in human terms, imagine a wolf that tips the scale like a full-grown adult man, but packs all of it into a low, muscular, four-legged frame. Now imagine several of them moving toward you together across the snow. A single one is already a formidable animal. The real power of the dire wolf, though, was never in the individual. It was in the number in the pack, and we will come back to that, because it is the key to almost everything about how this animal lived and, in the end, how it died. But here is the first surprise. It was not actually much taller. At the shoulder, a dire wolf stood around 38 inches, which is about the same height as a very large gray wolf living in Alaska right now. So forget the towering, horse-sized monster of the fantasy shows. If a dire wolf walked past you, it would not loom over you like a bear. It would look, at first glance, like an unusually thick, heavy, powerfully built wolf. The difference was not height, it was mass, and it was power. This is worth dwelling on because it is the first crack in the legend, and it matters. The dire wolf of popular imagination is enormous, a beast the size of a small horse that a person could almost ride. The real dire wolf was, in silhouette against the evening sky, wolf-sized. What set it apart was not scale but build. A stockier frame, a broader chest, a heavier head, more muscle packed onto the same rough footprint. Think of the difference between a lean distance runner and a heavyweight wrestler of the same height. Same stature, completely different animal. That is the dire wolf next to a gray wolf. The drama was never in how tall it stood. It was in how much force it could bring to bear. And the power was concentrated in one place above all, the head. This is where the dire wolf stopped looking like an ordinary wolf and started looking like something built for a very specific and very brutal job. Its skull was massive, deeper and broader than a gray wolf's, anchored to a bony ridge along the top called a sagittal crest that gave enormous jaw muscles something to grip. Its teeth were larger. And its bite was estimated to be around 129% as strong as a modern gray wolf's. That is not a small difference. This was a jaw built not just to hold prey, but to crush through the thick bones of enormous animals. It helps to picture what a bite like that actually means. A modern gray wolf can crack a deer bone. A dire wolf could shear through the leg bone of an animal many times larger, splitting it open to reach the rich marrow inside. Its teeth were not just weapons for the hunt. They were tools for extracting every last calorie from a carcass, for processing an entire large animal down to almost nothing. In a harsh, unforgiving world where a hunter could not afford to waste a single meal, that crushing, bone-cracking power was not a luxury. It was survival. The dire wolf was, in effect, built to eat the parts of an animal that other predators had to leave behind. Now look down at the legs and you find the detail that quietly begins to unravel the whole legend. The dire wolf's limbs were relatively light and, in some populations, relatively short compared to the heavy body they carried. A gray wolf is built like a marathon runner, long-legged and lean, able to lope for miles across the tundra chasing down caribou. The dire wolf was built differently. It was built like a wrestler, not a sprinter. Its whole skeleton points toward power rather than speed, toward grappling with and overpowering large, strong prey rather than running down small, fast prey across open country. Scientists describe it as an adaptation for strength, not for the chase. There is a temptation, when we imagine an Ice Age predator, to reach automatically for the word faster. Faster, bigger, deadlier. But the dire wolf was not really about speed at all. Where a gray wolf wins by endurance, chasing prey until it tires, the dire wolf seems to have won by force, by closing in and refusing to be shaken off. Think less of a greyhound and more of a pit bull scaled up to the size of a large dog you would not want to meet. Everything about its build says the same thing. This was an animal that got in close and held on, that overwhelmed its target rather than outrunning it. And that single design choice, power over speed, would echo all the way to the end of its story. So already from the bones alone, a picture is forming that does not quite match the legend. Not a scaled-up gray wolf, but something heavier, more powerfully jawed, and built for a different kind of hunting entirely. And when scientists finally looked inside those bones, at the genetic code hidden within them, the legend did not just bend, it shattered. For more than 150 years, everyone assumed the same thing about the dire wolf. Its bones looked so much like a gray wolf's that the conclusion seemed obvious. It was named Canis durus, placing it in the exact same genus as the gray wolf, Canis lupus, a close cousin, a sister species. The two were thought to have shared a recent common ancestor, splitting off from the same wolf-like stock that spread out of Eurasia. For a century and a half, the dire wolf was simply the gray wolf's big, extinct relative. Case closed. That name, Canis durus, was first given all the way back in 1858 by an American paleontologist working from fossils found along the Ohio River and in Nebraska. And for the next 163 years, it stuck. Every textbook, every museum label, every documentary repeated the same family tree. It was one of those facts that felt too solid to question, precisely because it had been repeated for so long by so many careful people. The bones were right there in the drawers. The resemblance was obvious. Why would anyone doubt it? And that is exactly what makes the story so instructive. The most unquestioned facts are sometimes the ones most in need of a second look. Then in 2021, a team of scientists did something that had never been done successfully before. They extracted ancient DNA from 5 dire wolf fossils, pulled from sites in Wyoming, Idaho, Ohio, and Tennessee, some of them over 50,000 years old. For the first time, instead of just looking at the shape of the bones, they could read the animal's actual genetic code. And what they found rewrote the family tree completely. Getting that DNA at all was a feat in itself. Genetic material breaks down over time, and pulling a readable sequence out of a bone that has sat in the ground for 50,000 years is painstaking, delicate work, the kind of thing that was simply impossible a generation ago. But once they had it, the code was unambiguous. This was not a subtle result, not a matter of the dire wolf being a slightly more distant cousin than everyone had thought. It was a completely different branch of the tree. one nobody had suspected, hiding in plain sight behind a wolf-shaped skeleton. The dire wolf was not a close relative of the gray wolf. It was not even in the same genus. The two lineages had split apart not 1 or 2 million years ago, but somewhere around 5.5 to nearly 6 million years ago. The dire wolf came from a completely separate, much older branch of the dog family, one that evolved in the Americas on its own for millions of years. Its closest living relatives, the study found, were not gray wolves at all, but animals like the jackals and the African wild dog and the dhole of Asia. The dire wolf was, in a very real sense, not a wolf. It just looked like one. To mark how deep this divide was, scientists moved it into a brand new genus of its own. It is no longer Canis durus. It is now Aenocyon durus, a name that means, fittingly, terrible wolf. And the split was so ancient and so complete that the two animals could not even interbreed. When gray wolves and dire wolves shared the same landscape for hundreds of thousands of years, and they apparently never mixed. The dire wolf left no genetic trace in any wolf, dog, or coyote alive today. When it died, its entire lineage died with it, absolutely and forever. So how could two animals end up looking so similar that experts were fooled for a century and a half? The answer is one of the most beautiful ideas in all of biology: convergent evolution. When two completely unrelated animals face the same problem and the same way of life, evolution often shapes them toward the same solution. A shark is a fish and a dolphin is a mammal, separated by hundreds of millions of years, yet both ended up with the same sleek torpedo shape, because that is what works for a fast hunter in the open ocean. The dire wolf and the gray wolf are the same story on 4 legs, two distant branches of the dog family, both shaped by the job of being a large pack-hunting predator, both arriving at the same wolf-like body. The resemblance is real. The relationship is an illusion. And the resemblance really was uncanny. It was so close that even trained experts, holding the actual bones in their hands, could sometimes struggle to tell a dire wolf fossil apart from that of a large prehistoric gray wolf. For generation after generation of scientists, the shape of the skeleton was the only evidence available, and the shape said wolf. It took a fundamentally new kind of tool, the ability to read ancient DNA, to see past the disguise that evolution had so carefully constructed. In a way, the dire wolf is a monument to just how powerful convergent evolution can be, so powerful that it can hide a 6 million year gulf inside a set of bones that look like close cousins. There is a quiet lesson buried in all of this, and it is one of the reasons stories like the dire wolves matter beyond mere curiosity. For 150 years, we were completely confident. We had a name, a classification, a family tree, all taught as settled fact. And all of it was built on a resemblance that turned out to be skin deep, or rather bone deep. It took humility and a new technology to admit we had been wrong. Every fossil in every museum drawer is potentially holding a secret like this, a truth we cannot yet read. The dire wolf is proof that even the things we are most sure of about the ancient past can be overturned in a single afternoon in a genetics lab. And this is the heart of why the dire wolf matters. It is not just an extinct animal. It is a lesson in how easily the shape of a thing can deceive us, and how the truth can hide inside the bones for a century, waiting for the right tools to read it. But knowing what the dire wolf truly was only makes the next question more interesting. If it was this powerful, specialized hunter, then what exactly was it hunting, and in what kind of world? To understand how the dire wolf lived, we have one of the most extraordinary fossil sites on Earth, sitting in the middle of a modern American city. In the heart of Los Angeles, beneath the traffic and the towers, lie the La Breatar pits, natural seeps of sticky black asphalt that have been welling up from the ground for tens of thousands of years. In the Ice Age, an animal that wandered onto that surface could become stuck, and its distress drew in predators, which then became trapped themselves. The result is a treasure vault of Ice Age life. and the single most common large mammal pulled from those pits is the dire wolf. The remains of more than 4,000 individual dire wolves have been recovered from La Brea alone. It is worth understanding why that place became such a perfect trap, because it also explains why we know the dire wolf so well. A single large animal, a bison or a horse, would blunder into the sticky asphalt and become stuck fast. Its cries of distress would carry across the plain, and to a hungry predator that sounded like an easy meal, a helpless animal unable to flee. So the hunters came, drawn in by the promise of food, and they too became trapped in the very same tar. One trapped grazer might lure in many predators, which is exactly why the pits are so overwhelmingly full of hunters like the dire wolf. Each of those thousands of individuals is a small tragedy, and together they are a scientific gift beyond price. A detailed, frozen census of who was hunting on these plains and how they lived. Think about what that number tells us. Thousands of individuals drawn again and again to the same trapped and struggling animals. That is not the signature of a lone hunter. That is the signature of an animal that lived and moved in groups. Like modern wolves, dire wolves almost certainly hunted in packs, and possibly in packs even larger than those of gray wolves today. And a pack changes everything. A single 150-pound predator is dangerous. A coordinated group of them, working together, communicating, surrounding and wearing down their target, is one of the most effective hunting systems nature has ever built. And La Brea is not the only place that tells this story. Far to the south, at a site in Peru called Talera, which also means the tar, more than 4,500 more dire wolf fossils have been pulled from the ground from dozens upon dozens of individuals. Two separate tar traps, thousands of miles apart, both filled with the same animal again and again. The picture could not be clearer. This was a social creature, an animal whose whole way of life depended on the group. And that has a poignant implication. Young dire wolves would have learned how to be dire wolves from the adults around them, learning the hunt, the territory, the coordination, passed down from one generation to the next. A dire wolf was not just born, it was taught. So what were they hunting? Here the chemistry of the bones speaks again. By analyzing the chemical signatures locked in dire wolf teeth and bones, scientists can reconstruct the menu. And it was a menu of giants. Roughly half of the dire wolf's diet appears to have been horse, and a large part of the rest was bison, the massive, long-horned Ice Age bison that dwarfed the bison of today. They also took camels, which were native to North America then, and the young of even larger animals, including juvenile mammoths and mastodons, along with the great Shasta ground sloth. This was a predator that specialized in big, powerful, dangerous prey. There is a striking detail hidden in that menu. The dire wolf seems to have largely ignored the easy targets. Smaller, faster animals like deer and elk, the kind of prey a gray wolf happily takes, barely appear in its diet. This was a hunter that went after the hard, dangerous, high-reward prey. The bison that could gore it, the horse that could kick it, the young mammoth guarded by a furious herd. That is a bold way to make a living, and it only works if you have the tools for it. The pack, the power, the crushing jaws. Every piece of the animal we have built so far, from the heavy body to the bone-cracking bite, fits this one strategy. The dire wolf was an all-in specialist in big game. And that specialization tells us why the animal was built the way it was. Now the heavy body, the crushing jaws, the powerful rather than speedy legs, all of it makes sense. A dire wolf pack was not built to chase down a fleeing deer across open ground. It was built to close in on something enormous, to grip it, to hold it, to overpower it through sheer combined force and refuse to let go. There is even a telling detail in the fossils. Dire wolf teeth show high rates of breakage and heavy wear, the kind of damage you get from biting down hard on bone. This was a rough, punishing way to make a living, and the dire wolf's whole body was engineered for it. But the dire wolf did not have this world to itself. The Ice Age plains of North America were crowded with other hunters competing for the very same prey, And to understand the dire wolf's life, we have to meet its rivals. Picture the landscape the dire wolf actually lived in. Not an empty snowfield, but one of the richest predator communities the continent has ever known. Something closer to the plains of East Africa today than to anything in modern North America. When scientists study the animals pulled from the La Brea tar, they find that dire wolves, saber-toothed cats, and American lions were all competing for the same prey, all crowded into the same hunting grounds. This was a dangerous world to be a predator in, because every meal you earned, something else wanted to take. That comparison to Africa is worth holding on to, because it corrects something in how we usually imagine Ice Age America. We tend to picture a bleak, empty, frozen waste. The reality was closer to a cold Serengeti, vast herds of grazing animals, and a whole guild of great predators living off them. More kinds of large carnivore packed into one landscape than anywhere on Earth today. When you walk across the American plains now and see, at most, the occasional coyote, you are looking at a hollowed-out version of what was here. The dire wolf lived in the full version, the crowded, roaring, dangerous original, and it lived there near the top. Consider the cast. There was Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat, as heavy as an African lion built like a wrestler, with 7-inch canine teeth for delivering a deep, killing wound to large prey. There was the American lion, Panthera atrox, one of the largest cats that ever lived, bigger than any lion alive today, a pure and powerful hunter. There was the giant short-faced bear, the largest meat-eating land mammal the continent ever produced, big enough to simply walk up and claim a carcass from anything else. And there, moving among all of them in coordinated packs, was the dire wolf. Each of these hunters made its living in a different way, and that is exactly how so many great predators could share one landscape. The saber-tooth was an ambush killer, exploding from cover to grapple with large prey at close range. The American lion was a powerful stalker. The short-faced bear used its sheer size to intimidate and to scavenge, letting others do the killing and then muscling in to take the spoils. And the dire wolf brought the one weapon none of the others had, the coordinated pack. Where a saber-tooth hunted largely alone, a dire wolf hunted as part of a team, and that teamwork let it tackle prey and hold territory in ways a solitary animal never could. But sharing a landscape did not mean sharing in peace. The chemistry of the La Brea bones shows that dire wolves, saber-tooths, and American lions were all chasing the same core prey, the horses and the bison, which means they were in constant, direct competition. Every kill was a potential flashpoint. Imagine a dire wolf pack bringing down a horse after a hard and dangerous effort, only to look up and see a group of saber-tooths, or the vast shape of a short-faced bear, drawn in by the commotion and ready to take the prize. On the Ice Age plains, killing your food was only half the battle. Keeping it was the other half. In a world like that, being part of a pack was not just useful for hunting. It was a form of defense. A lone dire wolf, even at 150 pounds, could lose its hard-won meal to a saber-tooth or a bear. But a full pack, a dozen strong working together, was a force even the great cats had to respect. The pack could bring down prey too large for any single hunter, and then defend that prize against rivals that might try to steal it. Strength in numbers was not just an advantage on the Ice Age plains. It was the difference between eating and starving. This was, in short, one of the most intense predator communities the continent has ever seen, a place where the pressure never let up, where the margin between a full belly and starvation was razor-thin, and the dire wolf thrived in it. For hundreds of thousands of years, its packs held their own against cats bigger than lions and bears bigger than anything alive today. That is a staggering record of success, which makes what happened next all the harder to comprehend. And this crowded, competitive world holds a quiet clue to the dire wolf's eventual fate. The dire wolf was a specialist. Its entire way of life, its body, its pack structure, its hunting strategy was built around one thing: killing very large animals. That specialization made it magnificently successful for hundreds of thousands of years, as long as the great herds of horses and bison and camels covered the land. But specialization is a gamble. It works beautifully right up until the moment the thing you depend on disappears. And it was about to. Before we get to that ending, though, there is one more part of the dire wolf's world we have to place on the map. Because the most remarkable thing about this animal is not just how it lived, it is where it lived. And the answer is, almost certainly, right where you are. The dire wolf was not a regional animal, tucked away in one corner of the continent. It was one of the most widespread large predators in the history of the Americas. Its fossils have been found from southern Canada in the north, all the way down through the United States, through Mexico, and deep into South America as far as Chile. It ranged across an entire hemisphere. And within the United States, it was almost everywhere. Dire wolf fossils have been pulled from the ground on both the Atlantic and the Pacific coasts. They have been found across the Central Plains, the southern states, and the Southwest. The very first dire wolf fossils ever discovered came out of the Ohio River in Indiana, back in 1854. They have been found in the tar of Lowe's Angels, in the caves of the Missouri and Arkansas Ozarks, in Florida, in Wyoming, in Idaho, in Tennessee, in Nebraska. This animal ranged across nearly the entire country. And what is striking is how the dire wolf seems to have adapted its hunting to whatever region it lived in. It was a big game specialist everywhere, but the specific game changed with the local landscape. On the open western plains, the packs ran down horses and the great long-horned bison. In the Ozark Hills of Missouri and Arkansas, the fossils tell a different story. There, dire wolves are often found alongside flat-headed peccaries, a kind of prehistoric wild pig that seems to have been their favored local prey. This was one species, spread across a whole continent of different environments, each population working out how to hunt the giants of its own backyard. Stop and let that sink in for a moment. The ground beneath a great many American towns and cities was once dire wolf territory. The plains where highways now run, the valleys where suburbs now sit, the rivers where people now fish on a quiet afternoon. 12, 15, 20,000 years ago, packs of these powerful predators moved across that exact land, hunting in the snow. In the Ozarks, they seem to have specialized in hunting flat-headed peccaries, a kind of wild pig. On the western plains, they ran down horses and bison. Wherever there was large prey, the dire wolf was there. So there is a real chance, a very real chance, that a dire wolf pack once crossed the ground where you are sitting right now. That is the strange and humbling truth at the center of this whole story. These animals were not creatures of some faraway exotic world. They were local. They were here. And a returning gray wolf or coyote you might glimpse today is walking, distantly, across the same land its ancient look-alike once ruled. Which brings us to the question everyone is asking right now. Because you have almost certainly seen the headlines claiming that this animal, the dire wolf, has been brought back from the dead. It is worth pausing on just how ordinary the dire wolf once was across this land. We tend to imagine Ice Age predators as rare, exotic monsters. But in its time, over much of North America, the dire wolf was simply the wolf. It was the common, everyday large predator, the animal whose howls would have carried across the evening plains, whose packs would have been a familiar and constant presence for any other creature trying to survive. If you could travel back 20,000 years and stand on the ground beneath your own town, the dire wolf is very likely one of the animals you would see. Not a curiosity, the main event. In April of 2025, the dire wolf did something no extinct animal is supposed to do. It made global headlines as a living creature. A company called Colossal Biosciences announced that it had brought the dire wolf back from extinction. Magazine covers showed a striking white wolf. The company introduced 3 pups with mythic names, 2 males, Romulus and Remus, and a female, Khaleesi, a nod to the fantasy series that made the dire wolf a household name. The story raced around the world. After more than 10,000 years, people said, the terrible wolf walks again. So what actually happened? The real science is genuinely impressive, and it is worth understanding clearly. Colossal scientists studied ancient DNA recovered from real dire wolf fossils, including a tooth around 13,000 years old and a skull around 72,000 years old. Then they took living gray wolf cells and made a set of precise edits to their genetic code, around 20 changes across 14 genes, targeting traits like body size, fur color, and the shape of the skull and face. They used domestic dogs as surrogate mothers, and in late 2024 and early 2025, the pups were born. They are real living animals. That part is not hype. And to be clear, this is a remarkable technical achievement. Reading the genetic code from a bone tens of thousands of years old, identifying which genes shape which traits, editing a living cell with precision, and carrying the result to a healthy birth. Every one of those steps sits at the frontier of modern biology. The people who did this are extraordinarily skilled, and the techniques they developed have genuine value, including potential uses in saving endangered species that are still alive today, like the critically threatened red wolf. So the story is not that a company did something worthless. The story is about what a thing like this can honestly be called. But here is where we have to be honest, in the way this channel always tries to be. Because the scientists who study dire wolves for a living have been remarkably clear about what these animals are and what they are not. Remember the 2021 discovery. The dire wolf was not a gray wolf. It split from the gray wolf line nearly 6 million years ago. You cannot bridge 6 million years of separate evolution with 20 gene edits. As one of the lead geneticists on the project herself later put it plainly, these animals are gray wolves with 20 edits. The wildlife body that assesses these things, the IUCN Specialist Group, officially declared that they are neither dire wolves nor even true proxies for them. In other words, what Colossal created is an extraordinary piece of genetic engineering, but it is, at heart, a modified gray wolf designed to look like our idea of a dire wolf. And there is a deeper problem that no gene edit can solve. A real dire wolf was not just its DNA. It was an animal that learned to be a dire wolf from its pack, its parents, generation teaching generation how to hunt the giant prey of a world that no longer exists. Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi have no dire wolf parents. They live behind fences on a private preserve. There is no ice age left for them to belong to. They can never learn to be the thing their genes gesture toward. This is a subtle point, but it may be the most important one of all. An animal is not simply a readout of its genes. It is genes shaped by an environment and by learning, and by the culture of the group it grows up in. A dire wolf pup 20,000 years ago learned which prey to target, how to coordinate the hunt, how to read the movements of a bison herd, how to survive a world full of saber-tooths and giant bears, all of it taught by the adults around it. That knowledge is gone. It died out with the last real pack, 10,000 years ago, and no amount of gene editing can write it back in. Even a perfect genetic copy, which these animals are not, would still be a dire wolf that never learned how to be one. None of this is to dismiss the science, which is real and remarkable, or the animals, which are alive and cared for. It is simply to tell you the truth. The dire wolf, the actual Aenocyon durus that hunted across America for hundreds of thousands of years, has not come back. It remains where it has been for the last 10,000 years, resting in the tar and the rock beneath our feet. And to understand why its return would be so difficult, we have to finally face the question of why it left in the first place. There is one more thread worth pulling here, because it reveals something about why this story captured the world so completely. The dire wolf was already famous before any of this, thanks to a fantasy series that turned it into a beloved and mythic creature. And the pups Colossal produced were deliberately shaped toward that fictional image, large and strikingly white. But real dire wolves very likely did not look like that at all. They ranged across warm, shrubby landscapes like ancient Lo's angels, not just frozen tundra, and researchers who have studied them suggest they were more likely to have had reddish or brownish coats, not the snowy white of the fantasy version. In other words, the famous white wolf on the magazine cover may owe more to a television show than to the fossil record. It is a small detail, but it captures the whole situation. What came back, in a sense, was our story about the dire wolf, not the animal itself. Around 13,000 years ago, the world of the dire wolf began to come apart. It vanished during the great wave of extinctions at the end of the last ice age, the same wave that erased the mammoths, the mastodons, the saber-toothed cats, the American lions, the giant ground sloths, and dozens of other great animals from North America. In a geological instant, roughly 90 kinds of large mammals disappeared from the continent, and the dire wolf went with them. The question is why, and the answer reveals the hidden weakness inside this powerful predator. The leading explanation comes back to that one word: specialization. The dire wolf was a specialist in large prey. Its whole existence was built on the great herds of horses, bison, camels, and the young of even bigger beasts. But as the ice age ended, those herds collapsed. A warming, lurching climate transformed the landscape, and one by one, the giant prey animals the dire wolf depended on died out. And a specialist predator cannot simply choose to eat something else. Its heavy body and crushing jaws, so perfectly built for overpowering huge animals, were poorly suited to chasing the small, fast prey that remained. When its food vanished, the dire wolf had nowhere to turn. To grasp the scale of what was happening, consider the sheer size of the collapse around it. During this great wave of extinctions, around 90 different kinds of large mammals, animals weighing over 100 pounds, disappeared from the Americas. The mammoths and mastodons the dire wolf hunted as juveniles, gone. The native horses that made up half its diet, gone from the continent entirely. The great ice age bison, the camels, the ground sloths, gone or transformed. The dire wolf was not just losing one food source. It was watching the entire foundation of its world crumble at once, an ecosystem that had stood for hundreds of thousands of years coming apart in the space of a few thousand. For a specialist perched at the top of that world, there was simply nowhere to stand once the ground gave way. And here is the detail that makes the point unforgettable. The gray wolf, that distant lookalike, lived through the very same catastrophe on the very same continent and survived. It is still here today. Why? Because the gray wolf was a generalist. It could hunt a giant bison, but it could also live on deer, on rabbits, on ground squirrels, on voles, on almost anything. When the giants died, the gray wolf simply shifted its diet and carried on. The dire wolf could not. The very specialization that had made it so dominant for so long became the trap that destroyed it. Two similar-looking animals, one flexible and one specialized, met the same disaster, and only the flexible one walked away. Scientists still debate the finer details. Some emphasize the role of the changing climate, the warming and the vegetation shifts that broke apart the old grasslands. Some point to the arrival of humans as a new pressure on the same shrinking herds. Some note that competition from more adaptable hunters may have finished the job. Most likely it was a collision of all these forces at once, striking a specialist that had no room to adapt. But whatever the exact mix, the outcome was final. The dire wolf did not dwindle slowly into some smaller form. It ended completely, taking its entire ancient lineage down with it. There is a haunting symmetry to how quickly it happened. The dire wolf had endured for hundreds of thousands of years, through earlier swings of cold and warmth, through the rise and fall of countless other species. And yet when the end came, it seems to have come fast, possibly within just a few centuries at the close of the Ice Age. An animal that had been one of the most common large predators across two continents was simply gone, in a span of time that, on the geological clock, is barely a heartbeat. In one era, you could not walk the plains without hearing their howls. A few centuries later, silence. And it is worth sitting with the deeper irony at the center of the dire wolf's fall, because it carries a lesson that reaches far beyond one extinct predator. The dire wolf did not die out because it was weak. It died out because it was too good at one thing. Its power, its specialization, its total commitment to hunting the giants of the Ice Age was the very thing that had made it dominant, and it was also the thing that doomed it the moment those giants disappeared. The gray wolf survived not because it was stronger, but because it was more flexible, more willing to settle for a rabbit when the bison were gone. In the story of these two look-alike animals, nature seems to whisper a hard truth. In a changing world, it is not always the most powerful who endure. Sometimes it is simply the most adaptable. And so the terrible wolf fell silent. For hundreds of thousands of years, its packs had moved across this land, from the Pacific coast to the Atlantic, bringing down the giants of a vanished world. And then, in the span of a few short centuries, they were simply gone, leaving behind their bones in the tar and the caves and the riverbanks of a country that would not exist for another 12,000 years. The most important thing I took away about the dire wolf was just how wrong we'd been about it. For a century and a half, we looked at its bones and thought we'd found a wolf. We were wrong. We turned it into a fantastical, gigantic, and terrifying monster. We were wrong about that too. The real animal was far more interesting. A powerful hunter descended from a distinct Native American lineage. Behind its wolf-like body lay an entirely different creature. Our understanding of it remained this way, until we found the tools to decipher the truth hidden within the bones. All of this is proof that the past never ceases to surprise us, and the real answers are still waiting for us beneath the ground. And there isn't much left for us to say. The dire wolf ruled this continent even before humans arrived. Then it went completely extinct, and no genetic engineering could truly carry on its lineage. Its packs may have roamed the very places where you live today. In the places where cities and towns stand today, they hunted in the snow. And in the end, they left behind only their bones. Now I have a question for you. Do you think dire wolf packs lived and roamed in the places where you live today? Write your answer in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. See you in the next video.